Welcome, Rabbi Bell.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kaplan.
Very exciting to have you here instructing for a course at Chabad at our courses. And I'm very excited about the subject, and I think many thousands of others around the world will be as well. This course is about kosher. We've had a previous course about food, where we've kind of laid a foundation for why food is significant in Judaism. And now we're kind of honing in. Now, what kind of food do we really focus on in Judaism? That would obviously be kosher. So in modern kosher, so to speak, there is a whole kashrus industry, it would be called, a kosher industry. And I understand that you are involved with it to different varying degrees, which I think is interesting. It's intriguing to me, and I think it's interesting to other people. Can you just share kind of a very quick overview of what that's all about?
Well, it's a very broad subject, and there's a lot to say about it. But one thing I just would like to say is that it's very, very interesting to be working in that field, because there are always new things happening. They're always finding new ways of doing things, and there's always new problems which are springing up. And it's amazing how it is that Judaism has the ability to adapt to all of these technological advances and figure out a way to keep kosher regardless of the conditions.
So there have been a lot of kind of continuing with that theme of kosher, the kosher agencies and the kosher industry. There's been a lot of talk not only in kosher but in the food industry in general, that there's a lot of deception and a lot of products that are labeled for something that they aren't necessarily. One of the famous ones is virgin olive oil, which isn't necessarily so virgin. How does that play into kosher?
That's a very interesting question. In fact, we have a whole description of that in Lesson 1. But this is one of the major challenges, and as the global economy becomes more widespread and the supply chain becomes more complex, and we're getting things from other countries such as China that do not have the same concept of honesty as most other countries in the world, it's really a tremendous challenge.
So kosher is, because it's such a challenge and there's so many details, and in a certain sense, the biggest challenges come with meat, perhaps fish, right? I mean, vegetables is far less problems that can come up with that, or any sort of natural foods generally have less problems with that. Wouldn't it be just more effective or easier for people to keep kosher to just be vegan?
Well, for kashrus purposes, the fact that something is vegan, first of all, as we mentioned in the course, things that people think are vegan are really not vegan at all. And I found many products that people who eat vegan are shocked to discover that they're actually eating meat products and other sort of animal products, and there's no way that they can know that because things don't go on the label, and it's only the kosher supervisors who go into the factory and see what's really going into the food. We'll be speaking about processing agents in the course and other things that don't go on the label whatsoever, so people thinking they're eating vegan are not necessarily doing so. There's also the issue of the equipment, as we'll be discussing through the course.
Let's say 100 years ago, our grandparents, if they were in Eastern Europe or they were in Israel or anywhere where they were, we didn't have kosher agencies. And somehow they kept kosher, and it seemed to be so much more simple then. They ate, what they knew to be kosher, and that's how it went. They were able to trust themselves, I guess. Now it's been so complicated. There's different agencies, there's this, there's that. Can you eat, can't you eat? Why couldn't we just continue doing what our grandparents did and rely on ourselves to make that determination?
That's a great question, and theoretically we would be able to do so, but that would require everybody to prepare all of their own food from the raw materials, and the great-grandmothers you're speaking about 100 years ago would have to take the chicken to the sheichet and the kosher slaughterer, and they would have to themselves pluck the feathers, and they knew how to check the internal organs to make sure it was not a treifa, that it didn't have a disease which made it not kosher, and they themselves would have to salt it, and they would have to soak it. So theoretically it's no problem, but I don't really see people going back to that way of life.
So it's basically nostalgia, where we like to think it was easier then, but in reality, it wasn't necessarily the greatest party.
Well, the kosher supervision was easier because you were making everything yourself, but you had to spend a lot of time in the kitchen doing so.
Is kosher rabbinic? Is kosher biblical? Where does it come in?
Well, many of the laws are of biblical origin, and we speak at length in Lesson 2 about that, and there are also various rabbinic decrees on top of that. So consuming beef with milk would be a biblical prohibition. Chicken and milk is a rabbinic prohibition. However, regarding certain things, the rabbinic laws are even more strict than the biblical laws, though all of them have to be kept, but they're of different origin.
we have a lot of people have different standards for kosher. Some people keep this kind of kosher, some people are more strict about their kosher. If kosher is a law, right, shouldn't it be there is kosher and there is non-kosher? How can you be more kosher or less kosher?
That's also a very good question. And the fact is, something is either kosher or it's not kosher. However, when a person looks at the idea of kosher food as something being very, very important to their life and their soul, then you have something, for example, water from the tap. So if you live in one place, you might feel comfortable drinking the water from the tap. Another place, you might not feel so comfortable, even though the health department says it's okay. Then you're going to another country, and the Mexico health department also says the water is okay, but you don't want to take the risk. And so too, you have different levels of, yes, you're allowed to drink the water, but whether you really want to take that risk, if you're worried so much about doing damage to your body and preserving its healthy state, so too for the soul, that has to be nourished in a proper way. And sometimes something might be, quote unquote, acceptable, it's kosher, but a person might want to be more careful.
So it's going the extra mile to make sure that you're doing everything in the best possible manner.
Yes, it's going the extra mile, but when it comes to one's health, if there was a recall on a product and there was a chance of 1 in 10,000 that the bottle you bought will give you food poisoning, so then all 10,000 bottles get recalled. And in reality, the food poisoning a person will probably recover from pretty quickly, where the spiritual damage is very serious nature.
So just to quickly follow up with that, is kosher though an all or nothing proposition? Can I eat something, if I ever eat something which is not kosher, should I bother keeping kosher?
Well, a person that is adding on in anything Jewish, everything you do is a mitzvah. And the person eats not kosher, so that's a prohibition. So if in this particular meal the person decides not to eat the non-kosher food and they're going to eat kosher food, so then at that time they did a mitzvah. And if the next meal they do the same thing, they have another mitzvah. So too, every mitzvah is of permanent importance and has a greater effect on the person's body and soul.
So it's not just a one-time mitzvah that goes from birth all the way until death, but it's every time you eat, it's another mitzvah of keeping kosher.
Yes, when a person is getting accustomed to a new way of eating and a new way of life, frequently people make mistakes. So a person starts, for example, by eating only kosher meat, and then will work on other items as well, and then work on their kitchen. And that's something which is best done in tandem with the local rabbinic authority about what to add first and how it is that one should go about it.
So you've chosen to teach about a subject, kosher, which I understand you've taught about extensively to many other people. You've taught it to a seminary. You've taught it in many different venues, and you're heavily involved in it, like we mentioned earlier. What would you hope for the students of this course to walk away with after listening to the 4 lessons?
It's interesting how you put it. I often tell people, if you were in an elevator with someone for 2 minutes and you would want to educate them and inspire them to keep a certain mitzvah, what would you be able to tell them in 2 minutes? And I always answer them, I would speak about kosher food, because when you tell people what's really going on in what they eat, people are very interested in what they eat. And people are often outraged about the things, but I thought they had to put everything on the label, and I thought there's no problem, and I thought this didn't contain this. And when people hear about it, even from, I tell non-Jews that I meet, if I'm on a plane and I speak about what's in the food, and many of them end up being very interested in eating kosher afterwards, because it's something which is so pervasive and people are so dependent on it, and our whole lives are dependent on it, and our flesh and blood, it consists of what we eat. And even the Ramban Nachmanides said many hundreds of years ago, you are what you eat. And how could you be putting stuff in your mouth and you really have no idea what's going on inside? And that's something which, as I said, as things become more and more complicated and the world becomes more and more intermeshed, it's something which is of increasing importance, and it's really quite amazing how it is that the kosher supervising agencies come to utilize modern technology and come to terms in order to give everybody the kosher food that they want.
Excellent. So there you have it. If you want to do a mitzvah and connect with God, of course, kosher is a a tremendous, excellent, and beautiful way to do that. If you also want to have more pure and honest food, and you want to know what you're eating, kosher is also good for that. And we hope that you join us for the course. There's going to be an opportunity to ask questions on our question section below the video, as well as on our Facebook group that we have for every single course. So enroll for the course, tune into the conversation, join the discussion, and hopefully it'll be a very inspiring course, and we'll all be a little more compelled or a little more inspired to keep kosher. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.